Okay, boy, far away.
Right. Well, welcome to Yorkshire. It's good to be here. My name's Paul Jeffery. I've been doing DPUK for about 8 years now, and I've learned so much in that time I couldn't tell you. I've been researching JFK for about, well, most of my adult life, so about 5 years. The amount of information everybody and the knowledge people have always made me think, well, if I ever get the opportunity to do a presentation, what on earth would I talk about that could even be vaguely enlightening for anybody? But I was doing some, the idea for this came about a while ago, so I was doing some research on the 7/7 attacks, London tube bombings 2005, and it was an article regarding, it was written from a pro-conspiracy point of view, which is not really relevant to this, but it was talking about, in their opinion, that there was the fingerprints of an organised cover story regarding those attacks and ways in which this had been put out into the public as a sort of, this had been disseminated to the public through the mainstream media in particular, but just in general how this this story had been conveyed to the public, and it mentioned certain specific ways in which they felt this had been done, and it got me thinking sort of sideways then to JFK case, thinking, well, if that's happened, if there is any truth in this, I wonder if this is what's happened with JFK, because that's a case that has probably a cover story to it that's been going on from the last 50 odd years, and it's evolved and it's adapted and it's changed, and it got me thinking, well, I wonder if some of these methods that were mentioned in this article would transfer to JFK. So what I've done is I've condensed them into this 7 deadly sins, and I'm just going to talk very briefly about each. It's quite broad general stuff. I've given a few examples regarding the JFK case that I think might be relevant for each one, and then I'll answer any questions, and hopefully we can throw it open to the floor for a bit of a discussion afterwards, because it's quite broad, so hopefully that can work. So I've borrowed this from, you've probably seen this quote before from Mr. Churchill: "In wartime, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies." And that's kind of the approach I'm going to sort of lead up to in this. A few things regarding the context of it.
If you click on slideshow at the bottom,
slideshow at the top.
oh, that easy.
Well, the mouse.
Yeah. Slideshow at the top.
But you don't use a slideshow, do you?
No.
You want to keep it separate.
No, you can't. It doesn't have to revolve. You can just click each one and change
Just
the
click
slide.
the left-hand side, yeah.
Is it crashed? Does page down work?
The mouse was moving.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it could be crashed.
Excuse me. Sorry. Let me. Forgive me.
See, I think it's crashed.
If you click on the slide that you're showing, okay, now does it have a scroll on the right hand side?
No.
Arrow button?
Looks like it's crashed.
A bit of context regarding this. It's been quite, I mean, the purpose of this isn't to point the finger at the CIA per se in this, but the notion of information coming through the media and being influenced by intelligence services, particularly with regards to Operation Mockingbird, is fairly well documented now. It was certainly well established in 1963. So there's a quote from Colby later on saying the CIA owns everyone of any significance in the major media, and then we're still, Mr. Casey in 1981, we'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American people believes is false. Well, when you look around, that's 40 years ago, and you look around at what's been happening recently, right up to including the antics in Salisbury, you do have to wonder whether that is pretty much the case.
Well, even the Russians don't believe those guys.
Tea
and,
towels.
It was just
Just
tourists,
went
wasn't
past
Tea towels.
Flown all the way
to
through.
bear in mind, it's broadly, I would say, a three-pronged attack
Russia,
of
look at.
how information comes in to the purposes of a disinformation campaign. Obviously, to support the official, bolster the official version. Secondly, to discredit alternative theories. And thirdly, to confuse and mislead those who seek to question the official versions of events, which is us lot, I suppose. We've all questioned something, aspect of the case at some point, I would imagine. The result of which renders deductive logic unavailable in many instances. So basically that's a bit of context, and also I don't often, as Mr. Angleton there, this is a quote from Edward Epstein, funnily enough, that, who talking about James Angleton, said, he was a student of deception to an extent that I had never seen even professional magicians understanding the structure of leading people away from one answer and leading them to another answer. So broadly speaking, we're looking at this, how this three-pronged attack in very broad terms might apply to JFK and how it's misled us, misled the public and supported the official story and also discredited the alternative theories. As I said, I've got that down into 7 broad techniques. Some of them are pretty much stating the obvious, but there's a sort of course of logic to follow, I think, with this. So, technique number 1, choose your witnesses, selective use of witnesses. We've seen this all the time, right back from the Warren Commission famously was selective in its use of witnesses. Some were ignored, some weren't interviewed at all, others were discredited, and credence was placed on certain star witnesses such as Hal Brennan, Helen Markham, people like that. So that's from one side. But selective use of witnesses occurs sort of across the board, even in more pro-conspiracy territory, such as the Oliver Stone JFK movie, which features Gene Hill in real life on the right there, and on the left half a face missing in that format. But basically that the witness, the selective use of witnesses, even in the Oliver Stone movie, was such that there were probably more credible conspiracy witnesses they could have featured in the film. Instead they featured one who's maybe a bit more contentious. And also in the world of debunkers, such as John McAdams of this world.
My girlfriend.
John McAdams of this world. I've got photograph tape with her. The debunkers of this world will also select certain conspiracy witnesses who they feel are not so credible as Beverly Oliver there, and there are others that come into it, I would say, such as Hoffman, Tom Tilson, Gordon Arnold as well, on the grassy knoll, people like that that are often picked up on by as being dubious witnesses. So in any argument, the basis of it tends to start from a very selective use of witnesses. And number 2, again, fairly obvious stuff in any argument, is to ignore the contentious issues. So we can either ignore or divert attention away from issues that can't easily be dismissed, or we can concentrate on issues that can't easily be resolved. The effect being that by ignoring the contentious issues and sticking to different issues, then that confuses the argument and drives the narrative in a certain direction. So I've just picked on examples there, such as issues that are often ignored, the intervals between the shots, with the second and third shots possibly coming close together, as opposed to, we often debate the number of shots, how many shots were there, which is hard to prove. Issues we mentioned earlier about the limo being cleaned at Parkland is to me a contentious issue, destruction of evidence, all sorts of things, and just generally ignore contentious issues and stick to ones that can be described as supporting the official version. Number 3 is character assassination, shoot the messenger. So Discredit the researcher rather than the research. This has happened a lot, maybe sometimes with justice, sometimes less so. So over the years we've seen, regardless if you've pinned on Jim Garrison, we've seen him attacked from all sides with his mafia links and things like that. McAdams with his conspiracy buffs, and I've just said, for example, there where Jack White he's discredited because he believed the moon landings were false. So you'd see articles that said, "Oh, this man believes the moon landings are false, therefore he mustn't be credible." So pretty straightforward thing there, and that does happen a lot. That the credibility of the researcher is attacked rather than the credibility of what they've actually got to say for themselves. Number 4, coming up. Use of pseudoscience. Misrepresent the argument using false, popular or pseudoscience. The 9/11 researcher Chris Bolin describes that as follows: use of pseudoscience or pathological science in which investigators ignore all evidence that contradicts the conclusion they have been asked to prove. And I'm not very hot on the science aspects of the case, but you do find a lot of contentious arguments regarding the scientific evidence which is misrepresented. It's become so confused as years have gone on that arguments go on various issues. I mean, the obvious one being the single bullet theory, of course. Others such as the head snap, neurospasm, the David Belling neurospasm, jet effect, all things relating to the fatal headshot, and even the acoustic evidence has become so sort of convoluted in the last 40 years that you do wonder whether the science, it's very hard, science is so easily misrepresented, it seems, that eventually everybody just gets confused and gives up, basically. The medical evidence comes into that category as well. So that, I think, has been used to mislead people along the way. Now, up to there, that's 4 of the 7 just done very quickly. Those are techniques, I think, that have been used along the way to bolster the official version and to discredit alternative theories. So, selective use of witnesses, ignoring the contentious issues, shoot the messenger rather than the message, and the use of pseudoscience. But then it gets a little bit more intricate when we come to the idea that to try and mislead people that are actually going to question the official versions. And essentially what we're talking about here is the first step in that really is I think this is an approach they've used. Just create your own conspiracy theory with inherent debunkability. In other words, use of red herrings or straw man arguments which seek to divide and conquer. Now in the 7/7 thing, there's I don't know whether you remember the bus bombing in Tavistock Square. At the time the photograph is taken of that, there's a little van parked up or just going past that says controlled demolition on the side of it. And at that time, controlled demolition was a buzzword for conspiracy theories because of 9/11. And years later, BBC ran a programme called Conspiracy Files, which was a sort of hit piece on this. And they explained it away by saying, oh no, it was just, they weren't really the controlled demolition, they would just, they just broke up bits of concrete and they didn't have a licence to handle dynamite or anything spectacular like that. And the suggestion was that this could have been a false conspiracy theory to lead people up the garden path, to lead the people who would be looking out for these things as use of a red herring. Could of course just have been a coincidence, but it is quite a coincidence when you think about it that outside the biggest terrorist attack in Britain there's a van's controlled demolition on the side, and that is the one thing people always say about 9/11. So anyway, regardless of that, I just wonder whether this has been used in JFK, because there are countless conspiracy theories that have popped up over the years. So obviously these are merely suggestions, but one of the most famous is Badgeman. There he is. Badgeman as a conspiracy theory is quite hot because it's a man with a gun behind the grassy knoll, behind the fence. But over the years it's been debunked to a certain extent. I'm not so sure really personally, but a lot of people don't believe it, saying, oh, the scale's all wrong and he's in the wrong place and all this sort of thing, and the debate goes on and on. So when you look at the original people who were behind the sort of badge man like Gary Mack, for example, you do wonder whether we were being led in the wrong direction with that. Also, in a broader sense, Cuba and Castro, with Oswald being linked to fair play for Cuba and his visit to the embassies in as we talked about earlier in Mexico City, he was kind of being labelled as being a pro-Castro figure, which in itself could mean, was that a conspiracy, but not again with lots of debunkability to it, that it wouldn't really have been anything to do with Castro, and it does seek to mislead people. Also, from a completely different area of the case, this book, Best Evidence by David Lifton, one of the most popular, one of the best-selling conspiracy books, I think. It creates a conspiracy theory that the body was altered to disguise evidence of frontal shots. But again, over the years since it came out, it's been picked apart, a lot of it's been debunked. Some people support it, some don't, and it does kind of divide people. I couldn't find the actual passage this, but there's a good section in one of the Harrison Livingston high treason books, and he's talking about the period of time towards the end of the HSC inquiry regarding the medical evidence and particularly the authenticity of the X-rays and photographs, and he was talking about the CIA break-in, from the safe was broken into, and all around that time. He tells a story of how, in his opinion, he felt that there were generally reaching a consensus on the authenticity of the photos and X-rays, and a consensus on aspects of the medical evidence. And he says, right in the middle of that, out comes this book and blows the whole thing out of the water, because suddenly you've got a new conspiracy theory thrown in. And he did suggest whether this was kind of, it was, the timing of it certainly was suspicious to him. The idea that you throw in a conspiracy theory but it has inherent debunkability. Some would suggest, well, how did they get the body? How did they get control of the body? How did they get it off Air Force One? All that side. So there is a lot of contentious aspects to it, and just points to consider about the use of red herrings. I've just been saying, really, were any of the well-known conspiracy theories implanted to deliberately mislead us? What purpose has that theory served? Usually to divide and conquer. It divides the research community. It also confuses the casual observer, which I think is important, because, like earlier we talked about Mortal Error, the book, and the idea that the Secret Service agent shot him by accident from behind, and this was the 150th anniversary documentary that was made into a television programme on I think it was Channel 5, was it? And I go into work one day and my boss is telling everybody that that's what really happened, and I'm sort of saying, I'm not sure about that really, don't you know? But it's a conspiracy theory. Well, an accident admittedly, but it's a theory, and it's not very credible to most people, but some people who don't know the full picture may believe it. And then really we're saying, who had the power to implant a conspiracy theory and lead a false trail? Well, we're maybe back into Operation Mockingbird territory there. Other examples, just very briefly, that I think could come under this, the whole Mac Wallace fingerprint scenario. When I was in Dallas in 2003, this was fairly big topic. I bought the Bar McClellan book from the old Conspiracy Museum, and the idea that LBJ was behind it because it was Mac Wallace. And of course, over the years, inevitably, it's been debunked to a large extent. If you remember Joan Mellon at Canterbury, Joan Mellon at Canterbury about 5 years ago, and she's written a book about it now, saying, you know, that it's not correct, and you do have to wonder about that one. Zapruder film, tampering, fakery, again, highly contentious issue. Not going to touch on that really now, but the conspiracy theory that the entire film was faked, and that's a really controversial one on the internet. People argue the toss over that one. Two Oswalds, again, not just John Armstrong, but the notion of the two Oswalds theory. Again, some of that has been debunked. Again, it's a conspiracy theory that has a lot of holes in it. Limo, well, it has there are elements of truth which I've come to, but in very broad terms, it's a conspiracy theory that leads people in a certain direction. The limo stopped. I've put that as an example. Some people are adamant that that's got credibility, that the limo actually stopped, which would implicate the Secret Service, and yet the films don't really show it actually stopping. So, again, but there are some people who believe that. And also people who've confessed to involvement, they create a conspiracy theory, like James Files, Chauncey Holt, Judith Baker, etc. But again, there are areas where there's a lack of credibility, and again, people spent a lot of time debating the pros and cons of those people. Which brings us to number 6, which is the sort of counterpart to the use of red herrings, which I've called death by association. Now this is basically the Churchill, this is the bodyguard of lies bit. So not only have we got maybe false conspiracy theories which are implanted into the narrative, but with inherent debunkability, if you mention truth alongside lies, then it becomes even more confusing. So if X believes Y, then Z must also be false because Y is false. So in other words, if I tell you a story and only 90% of it's true, the other 10% is lies, you're going to think, well, it's all lies, and that bit's definitely wrong. So it's all nonsense. And I think this is really what I believe has happened. Now, it's hard, obviously, it's very hard to prove, but has this happened in the JFK assassination? Picked on one or two things. There are lots, I suppose. For example, maybe Howard Hunt. The question of whether he was in Dallas on November 22nd, which came into the Liberty Lobby trial, Mark Lane's plausible denial book about that, and the whole idea that he was accused of actually being in Dallas on November 22nd, and it was really thrown out eventually. But he is a plausible conspirator on some levels, I suppose. But by saying, well, he wasn't in Dallas, you can throw the baby out with the bathwater and throw out the whole argument. Nixon is another potential in that category. Plausible conspirator, I would say. But then when you get on to, well, was he in Dallas on November 21st, 22nd? What time did he leave? What was he doing there? Was he pulling the strings or whatever? And if you debunk that bit of it, then it tends to debunk the whole thing. And
Left at 11 o'clock apparently.
yeah, which I think is probably the case, but there's still some people who want to, question his involvement based on that rather than maybe based on more solid grounds. Other possible examples where this could have happened: the Madeline Brown story. She's the one who was allegedly LBJ's mistress, and she knew about the Mac Wallace story and all that, and did interviews with her on YouTube. She's long died now. But one element she mentions quite famously is the party at Clint Murchison's house the night before, where up pops Nixon, he's there, even though he's there, and Ed Hoover and LBJ's there. And so some parts of her story I think are quite plausible, but others, like the party, is perhaps less plausible. So it has the effect of maybe just ruining the whole narrative. Marita Lorenz, possibly, some people think she's in that category. She was the CIA asset who testified at the Hunt trial, the Howard Hunt trial, and came up with a tale of how she was there as part of a CIA training, and she was part of an abort team or something, or a diversion team, and again, maybe there was some elements of truth in that story, others not so. And it's also happening. I think this has happened. It's happened in other cases. It happens all the time. I mean, when there's a plausible version of events. If you throw in something that sounds on the surface like a good conspiracy theory, but then by the time it's been picked apart by everybody and discredited, suddenly none of it has any credibility. I mean, I could just throw in recent examples, like, for example, a well-known pop singer entertainer who appears on a VIP paedophile list, along with a well-known late former Home Secretary, and this seems to be gathering momentum and credibility. And then all of a sudden, lo and behold, he's accused of doing something in Sheffield, and the BBC, the nasty BBC, filmed the whole thing, and they shouldn't have done this, they shouldn't have done that. And there's a false smokescreen provided, that then, talking about Sir Cliff, of course, if there's a false smokescreen created by saying, well, this will accuse him of this, which is similar but not quite the same, then by the time that's been thrown out of the courts and he's had his apology and his payoff and everybody's, you know, argued about it, then all of a sudden the original argument gets discredited by that. The baby goes out with the bathwater, the original story is debunked by association. And finally, number 7. Number 7, if all else fails, just resort to stock phrases with derisory connotations. And in the area of social media, this is especially relevant where we're in short staccato characters. So calling somebody a conspiracy theorist, probably certainly happened to me several times. Conspiracy, nope, tinfoil hat, and even, put that in small print there, in case it offends anyone, anti-Semitism. You don't want to be accused of that. And by using these phrases, they do still act quite powerfully to try and discredit people. It's amazing how effective a few cheap insults can be in discrediting an argument, especially if used by mainstream media, mainstream social media certainly. And this happens, and it's in some ways I feel getting worse. It's very hard to debate these things without somebody throwing it on you as, oh, well, you know, you believe in little green men, or you believe Elvis is still alive, and silly things like that. And they become very adept at doing this, and you see it happens on the news in this country, the papers. It certainly happens on Fox News in America. If you watch any film of conspiracy researchers being attacked on mainstream American media, it's brutal. It's like, I don't know. It's just ridiculous. So basically that's all I wanted to talk about. That there's a kind of a three-pronged attack, and has this been used? So how have they gone about bolstering the official version whilst attacking the alternative theories and theorists, but also confusing and misleading the rest of us along the way with use of red herrings, debunkable elements stacked alongside true elements, and the whole thing becomes, after 50 odd years, very, very hard to follow. So I hope the presentation wasn't too hard to follow. But thanks for listening, and I'll answer any questions, or we can just throw the thing on for the wall.
Yeah.
So I was just going to say that as I trained as a lawyer, that's it. When you think about it, that's exactly what you learn, how to become a lawyer, because you're trying to come up with, build into it reasonable doubt. So you go through those processes of then debunking the witnesses. If the witnesses are very strong, have a go at them. So the whole process is...
When I did jury service many years ago, I mean, this is what happened then exactly. The defendant, or somebody had been in the dock, and he had a big bandage on over his eye, and they managed to bring in that he was he'd been in a pub brawl last night, which had nothing to do with the case. But immediately the jury are going, oh well, he's obviously not someone we should believe. But it had nothing to do with what the case was about. Just that they managed to throw in there that he'd been in a fight last night, and
He could simply have been struck, couldn't he?
Well,
You don't know, the
just,
background to it is lost, isn't it?
Yeah, it just discredits people before they get
And the
started.
stronger the case, the more that you're going for below the belt, because you're getting more desperate. So in a way, that goes to prove how strong the conspiracy theory case is, because you wouldn't be, using such dirty tactics, certainly the one I learned, unless they were needed.
I would have said that if we're to believe there was a plot, and no matter how big or in JFK, the perpetrators would surely have known that the official version would only go so far. It wouldn't convince everybody, and that along the way they would need something else to fight off the critics, the ever-growing number of critics in the cases, that the original story wouldn't. They must have known that. They must have had some other ideas, some other tricks up their sleeve.
It's the cats and memos are about.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the psychological thing that we all have, is to unfortunately cover your asses. So I've always thought, as part of this, they knew, if you know anything about psychology, that the FBI, whether or not they had anything to do with it, were always going to try and minimise their involvement. So that whole thing, we have to question as to whether they generally, each element, were involved, or people were involved, or they were purely trying to throw it onto somebody else. And we know the FBI were blaming the CIA and etc. etc. So.
And they can get very creative, can't they? In the case of the Warren Commission, just admit to put a comprehensive index in. Provide 26 volumes of testimony and evidence and don't give an index.
Hidden in plain sight, isn't it?
It's brazen even, isn't it?
To do the index.
I mean, social media and the internet is given a voice to a lot more people to invent their own conspiracy theory and to debunk others.
Is anybody here a member of the Spartacus Forum? The one John Simkin, education forum or whatever it's called.
There's a guy, sorry.
That has so many counter arguments and counter claims, and people who come forward with very detailed conspiracy theories, and then they spend the next sort of 100 pages tearing it all apart, and especially something like Zapruder film.
That's one of my interests. But
that is a real.
There's a guy online called Leroy Blevins. Yeah. And I can't help but watch what each piece he puts up online, and I'm thinking, do I believe this guy, or
Did the one who did like 13 shots or something like that?
Yes.
Yeah, from all over. And he's found another assassin to Zapruder's right in the pagoda.
The film.
Yeah.
I was going to mention that to you, just for photos now, as he panned round, was literally in the last frame or two of the back of some guy's head.
That's on the fence, isn't it? At the fence, at the corner. But what he's saying is that behind Zapruder, on his right, there's a guy with a rifle in the pergola.
Yeah.
And he also mentioned that just before the limousine goes into the triple underpass, he suggests that John Kennedy sits up again. Have you seen this?
Wow.
And if you really slow it down and you freeze frame it, unless I'm being conned here, there is a person on the right hand side of the limousine who is sitting up. And you think, how does this conspiracy first illuminate itself?
Forgive me for butting on that.
No.
I think that's fascinating. One of the things that really moves me about this entire case is the fact that until they finally gave up trying to resuscitate him and bring him back to life, the reason they tried to bring him back to life was he still had a heartbeat. But that guy, or an alternate non-responsive middle, that guy's body, his nervous system, is unconscious, was fighting to stay alive. And I just wonder if in those few seconds, maybe ultimately, whatever's left of anything that's going on in his consciousness,
in his head,
certainly front brain is thinking, what? Pardon my French, what the fuck's going on here? And just a jolt, and then body says, hang on a minute, you can't do this. bump shot down. So for a second or so,
Just a second before he goes into the triple underpass.
yeah, what's
Somebody
what
is sitting up.
happened, you know, something,
It's not
you know,
Connolly.
This is the, you know, this is with all within 6, 7, 8 seconds.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
what you know,
Well, of course, JFK had a very bad back.
Yeah, he had the brace, didn't he?
I had the,
You were brace,
the
yeah.
brace,
A girdle brace and a back brace, which tended to make it impossible for him to do anything but sit up.
okay, but I mean, in the image, I mean, which I'd never seen before. I'd never seen that image of the open door with him lying.
That's a
on-
painting,
That's
isn't
a
it?
painting.
That's a
Oh, it's a
painting.
painting.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
That is a
forgive me, sorry.
painting, yeah.
Oh, right.
It looks very convincing, but it is a painting.
Oh, no.
I believe it
In
to
a
be
way,
a
I'm pleased to hear that, really. Because,
I
Yeah.
was going to ask that question.
Yeah, I'd never, yeah.
I didn't think
no,
that was
thank you.
The thing that strikes me about this, I was going through my mind when you were talking about your excellent presentation, was about Dr. David Kelly, what they did to him. And they did exactly what you're describing. They undermined. They called him a Walter Mitty figure.
Yeah.
You know, just completely slagging him off. And I'm just reading, I didn't realise this, you guys probably do, that Lord Hutton decided that the evidence relating to the death, including the post-mortem reports, photographs of the body should remain classified for 70 years.
Nothing suspicious, of course.
No, of course.
It's like Hillsborough. It's like Hillsborough. Cover up and cover up and cover up.
I think the same with Dunblane. the shooting
Absolutely.
of Dunblane.
Absolutely.
Only Head, but Laird, but 75 years on all the
That's-
files.
That's the theory that it's to do with gun control. Again, there's something dodgy about that one.
My son-in-law was in the next door classroom. He was a pupil in the next door classroom. Lucky boy.
And Paul, there's also the matter of semantics, isn't there? For the unwary, for the gullible, you can use, and it's beloved of the Warren Commission, no evidence was found to support blah, blah. When it's actually dug into, no evidence was looked for.
Yes.
But you simply present it as no evidence was found.
Yeah.
Well, you know.
Well, you wouldn't find it if you didn't look for it.
Precisely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
soon
interesting,
paint somebody in the wrong light if people aren't fully informed of all the
Yeah.
of all the
If you're just willing to look it up unquestioningly, then yeah.
Well, I have a friend who doesn't speak to me now. We've kind of lost touch because he read Norman Mailer, and on the basis of that, rejected every other argument I had to throw at him. I tried my best, and I said, well, yeah, but what about this, what about that, what about the other? And he said, you know, Oswald was a sociopath, he was a complete nutter, he was a loser, you know, Posner's argument.
Well, thrown in with that, but that's its outcome. But early on it goes into great detail about the declassified, because of the fall of the Soviet Union, the declassified, some of the agents, ex-KGB agents talked a bit about it. It's a whole big pile of disinformation.
But what we mustn't forget is that also, that just reminded me, because one of the Russian guys who actually went into Russia, I got into conversation with one of the researchers as the 1989-1990 went to interview the Canadian, went to interview the people that knew Oswald in Russia. Made a point to me that it's very difficult because Oswald was a pathological liar. There's no doubt about that, but that comes down to his childhood. I've done a lot into child psychology, and kids that have a troubled childhood often go into their own little bubble where they, you know, I've got a friend who just can't stop himself lying. So Oswald was one of the, you know, very bad on himself because it's very difficult to work out when he's not lying and when he's telling the truth, because he was his own worst enemy in that sense.
I think the Norman Mailer book's interesting because rather than just a straightforward hit piece like the Posner book is, even though they essentially arrive at the same conclusion, Oswald did it alone, the Mailer book includes all this wealth of information that seems incredibly well researched. And yeah, again, is that a case of, are there elements of truth in that book that are then thrown out at the end by saying, oh, Oswald did it on his own? Whereas the Posner one is more like your straightforward, that's point number one, and that's just supporting the official version and then discrediting conspiracy theories. That's all it doesn't.
Because with a Mailer book you would think, look at the depths that they've gone to in investigating it, and the conclusion is, I
thought all the way through it was going to say, it was going to come up with a...
It's quite clever, isn't it, when you actually...
The RFK book.
Dumbledore.
That's a good one like that as well.
There's no other book in any of the Kennedy assassinations that I've read that is more bizarre than that. Every single page, from front to back, presents all the evidence,
Yeah.
but it was a conspiracy, except for the last page
Yeah.
where he basically turns it all around and says, "Oh no, it was Saham."
Do you think it was Len?
I think so.
He became Cesar's agent, so his publicity manager, or
Very, very
something,
strange.
having just accused him of murder.
Who was the author of
Weird
that book?
Dan Mulder.
Oh, Dan Mulder.
Maybe that's an alternative strategy from the other side of the argument. Present all the evidence that shows you this conspiracy, but by saying
Still
there wasn't one, at least you're showing the evidence there, so you know that anyone who reads it will, until they get to that last page, at least be able to, you know, if someone's not going to research and put all that time into providing all that evidence, if they actually want to disprove the case, will they? So maybe that was just not only a survival tactic, but, well, you know, I'll say A, but what I really mean is B. So if I just show all the evidence for B, but I actually say that I'm saying A, everyone will know that I'm actually saying B.
And it indicates it's been an open and fair approach to the subject,
yes.
even though the conclusion is...
The CIA did that with Epstein, because Epstein was writing his book for his masters, and then he admits that he got funding to do the next book under the CIA. So obviously he was, they've been paid by the CIA to do certain. Although once again, it's the most interesting information because his law lecturer was Wesley Liebler at the time, so he got inroads into some of the things that, Liebler did have an open mind. He sort of completely believed Silvio Odio, and he was one of the ones who wanted to delay the Warren Commission to look into it more, which of course didn't happen because it had to be out before LBJ. 64.
Sure.
And Lifton as well, it was close to legal in
Oh, yes,
he got to know him as well.
Yeah, which is how he got his interest really, isn't it?
Yeah, Legal died in a plane crash as well.
Yeah. Mind you, plane crashes are fairly common. When I did the
If you're involved in
when I did the helicopter, no,
Excuse me, I'm
that's
flying
fabulous.
tomorrow.
Once I actually looked into all the American figures and all the rest of it, it's horrific how many. When you think all those musicians and people that died in the 60s in plane crashes
Was Hale Boggs in plane crash as well?
Yeah,
it wasn't the last.
Do you think Lipton's research is now being discredited then?
It has been. A lot of people don't believe
Don't believe it.
it. Don't believe it at all.
And what about the mortician?
Well,
what was his
again,
name?
Paul Connor and people like that, the interviews, their testimony is pretty strong. It was pretty solid. But his conclusion that the body was somehow whisked away and altered a lot of people don't buy it. I'm not saying I don't.
But he noticed that sentence in the FBI report, surgery to the head.
Pre-operative surgery.
That's it, and that's
Sorry?
Doug Horn.
Right. Yeah.
With the two FBI agents.
Yeah. Oh yes, that's right.
Yeah. Sorry. Doug Horn has dealt with this. What Lifton got wrong is he thought that the surgery was conducted at Walter Reed. It wasn't. It was conducted by Humes at Bethesda. Because if you read Horn's latest work on all of this, and I'm not sure, because there's crossover between Horn and Mantic. This is stuff I've picked up online, but basically Horn has got the timings of the grey ambulance, the navy ambulance, and the black ambulance. They turn up at different entrances. The body is taken in through the back. The surgery is conducted between about 6:20 or 20 to 7 and 8 o'clock when the official autopsy begins, during which time the casket is then brought in ceremoniously and the body is transferred, etc. etc. So there's all kinds, and Horn's been through it in fine-tooth comb detail. So the surgery was conducted, but it was done by Humes. It's only after 8 o'clock that Sept and O'Neill get in, and then Sept writes in his report that surgery of the head had been conducted because it had been done secretly. Sorry.
Isn't that the strength of Gerald Custer? When they're interviewing him, saying I was going on my way to process the X-rays and stuff, and I saw the official, the big grey bronze casket with Jackie and Bobby coming in. And
Exactly. And also, the brain had already, it wasn't out, but you could see that the brain had already, prior to the autopsy beginning at 8 o'clock, or 5 to 8, 5 past 8, whatever it was, had already been removed. Because,
which is what
obviously, Hughes had taken it out, removed as much shrapnel as he could.
There was a gasp in the room.
Yeah.
I wish I could have found a passage in High Treason in time that what Livingston had said about the timing of the Lifton book coming out. In his opinion, it came out just at a time when they were beginning to get some conclusive, come to some solid conclusions about the medical evidence, and then out comes that book, and it distracted him because it was a well-selling book, wasn't it? I don't know, most conspiracy books don't really sell that well. That one was one that did, and he just suggested that maybe this had been done to mislead.
Livingston and Groden also did the research and claimed that there is absolutely no way, and this is all done in the same book. I think it's the 1991 issue of High Treason, and they claim there's absolutely no way that the body could have been spirited away, there's no way there was surgery, blah blah blah. Then in the afterwards of the book, to their credit, which I don't know if I mentioned this in the paper in April's magazine, it may be in one of the next versions that will come out in about 5 years' time, but to their credit, they retracted that because they subsequently they interviewed far more witnesses, and they realised that actually it was possible, and their guesstimate is, which I disagree with, their guesstimate is that the body swap actually happened at Parkland. But I mean, I find that very hard to believe.
Yeah, I didn't know about that bit of the end.
They basically say, we have to retract. It did happen. It just didn't. It didn't happen at Walter Reed.
It was a very, very heavy casket, and it might not necessarily have realised if it had been empty.
Indeed. Fair comment, very fair comment.
Peter, what were you saying about the X-rays as they saw the casket coming in?
It's on there. It's called Best Evidence and Research video, where he puts on interviews like Paul Connor, Joe Custer,
interviews of
is it Audrey Reich?
Aubrey.
Aubrey Reich. And they interviewed Joe Custer, and he's he's got all the X-rays for development. Done. Was working on the top. There's like obviously a first floor, or they call it second floor, ramp corridor, which opened up on like the main entrance to the hospital. It was taking them for processing, and all of a sudden Jackie and Bobby come in with the gold, bronze ceremonial casket, and he's thinking,
wrong way around.
There you go. That's further evidence to support that idea. So I mean, Horn's done this meticulously, and he's got, you can find the
documents for the Times every week.
Yeah, exactly. Interviews with all the people, extant people.
David, is that all just online, or it's not?
You can find all this stuff online. Well, what I'll do, I've printed off a lot of this stuff. Give me a week or so, when I get a minute to get my head around it, I'll let Stuart know, even if it's a URL, or if I've got it, I may have actually saved it as a PDF. I'll provide the PDF to Stuart to forward on, because Horn's like a dog with a bone with this stuff, as you know. I mean, he's the 5 volumes of Inside the... I mean, it's just amazing stuff.
But that's another thing. You can believe that it's a really good idea to have 2 caskets if you had any head of state or any important persons. You don't know. You never knew if there's going to be a world war, if there's going to be, things were going to be taken for, whisked away, or going to be held for ransom. So you can see how you could have made anybody question it would be told, well, this is a protective thing that a legitimate decoy. So you can imagine how
interesting to provide cover for them. So it's a decoy within a decoy.
All smoke and mirrors.
Legal schmeagle, I love it.
It's all smoke and mirrors.
Indeed.
That's why we're still talking about it all now.